Welcome to This Explainer. Today we are taking a seriously fascinating journey back in time to uncover the lost sounds of the ancient world. Let's just jump right in, shall we? For the longest time, we've been able to see the ancient world through its ruined cities, we can read its thoughts through preserved texts, and we get a feel for its daily life through recovered artifacts. But its music? That has always felt kind of like a ghost, just echoing out of reach.
So, what did the ancient world actually sound like? How can we possibly reconstruct the music of civilizations that existed millennia before anyone even thought of an audio recording? For a long time, scholars just assumed ancient music was totally improvised, passed down purely by ear, and eventually lost to the wind. But thanks to some absolutely incredible archaeological detective work and the deciphering of ancient clay tablets, we now know that is not the whole story, not even close.
All right, let's kick things off with Section 1, Unlocking Ancient Melodies, from oral tradition to written sound.
Now, in prehistoric societies, music definitely was passed down orally, but as writing systems started to develop, particularly over in Europe and Asia, societies got a lot more stratified. In 2750 BCE, we start finding physical evidence of really advanced instruments, like the magnificent harps of in Mesopotamia. By 1400 BCE, we hit a massive turning point with the Hurrian hymn from Syria, literally one of the oldest known instances of written music in human history. And much later, rolling into the 1st century CE, we see surviving Greek musical notation. The big takeaway here is that as early societies became more complex, they actually invented phonetic musical notation to preserve, share, and standardize what they were playing.
Fast forward to 1986. Professor Anne Drafkin Kilmer publishes her decipherment of a 4,000-year-old cuneiform tablet from the ancient Sumerian city of Nippur. And what she unlocked was just astounding. This wasn't some ancient inventory list or a bunch of royal decrees. She argued this tablet contained fragmentary instructions for performing and composing music, specifically in harmonies of thirds. This was a total game changer. It proved these ancient peoples weren't just casually improvising basic rhythms, they were purposely composing complex, multi-layered melodies.
Moving right along to Section 2, the math of the scale, Pythagoras and Mesopotamian tuning. So these cuneiform tablets show us that by at least 1800 BCE, around the Old Babylonian period, musicians were operating within a heptatonic scale. That's just a fancy way of saying a musical scale with 7 pitches or tones per octave. Their tuning procedures were deeply standardized. These societies operated entirely within a diatonic system made up of 7 interrelated scales. They even had their own specific vocabulary for musical strings, fingering techniques, and intervals like fourths and fifths. Pretty advanced stuff, right?
Here is where it gets crazy. That ancient Mesopotamian 7-note tuning procedure, it's functionally identical to our modern Western major scale. Seriously, think of the do-re-mi white keys on a piano. When playable replicas of ancient Sumerian instruments are strummed using these ancient tuning texts, modern listeners are usually super surprised. They hear something that sounds so much like Western music, they assume there must be some kind of mistake. But it's perfectly correct. The acoustic science they were using is fundamentally the exact same as ours.
And this mathematical foundation brings us to the ancient Greeks. The philosopher Pythagoras rigorously studied how strings vibrate and how their lengths relate arithmetically to create overtones. He took this so seriously that he believed music was subject to the exact same mathematical laws as the mechanics of the cosmos. It's a concept known as musica universalis, or the music of the spheres. And honestly, it is highly probable the Greeks actually learned this foundational music theory, along with their math, straight from the ancient Near East.
Which brings us to Section 3, Instruments of Antiquity, Engineering Sound. Let's look at the actual hardware. Take the toggle tuning system used on a 13-stringed silver boat-shaped lyre which was recovered from the royal cemetery of For the longest time, researchers were totally puzzled by a narrow rectangular slit right in an instrument's soundbox. Like, how did the string stay in place? Then it clicked. The string attaches to a wooden toggle. When you pull the string taut around the top yoke, that toggle turns and securely anchors right against the slit below. This let the ancient musicians stretch, fasten, and perfectly tune every single string. It is just a gorgeous piece of acoustic engineering.
But what do they actually sound like? Well, the bull-headed lyre, which is the largest of the group they found at has these really long strings. That gives it a deep, rich register, kind of like a modern bass file. Meanwhile, the medium-sized silver bovine lyre sounds a lot more like a cello. Just imagine those beautifully resonant, deep strings echoing through an ancient Mesopotamian royal court. It must have been incredible.
Let's jump over to ancient Egypt, where we find the sistrum,
This was a highly sacred rattle made from a U-shaped metal frame with sliding crossbars. When you shook it, it made a loud jangling or a soft clanking noise. The coolest part? Its Egyptian name, Sesheshet, is actually onomatopoeic. It literally mimics the sound of a breeze rustling through papyrus reeds. It was carried almost exclusively by women and priestesses in the worship of Hathor, the cow goddess. They believed its repetitive, rhythmic shaking could induce ritual healing, bring joy, and even stop the destructive flooding of the Nile.
Now, swinging over to ancient Greece, a massive variety of instruments completely dominated their religious ceremonies and public entertainment. For strings, you had the strummed lyre, which was the standard training instrument for an aristocratic education, and the larger, more professional cithara. For winds, they play the aulos, a double-reed pipe that sounded somewhat like a modern clarinet, and the syrinx, better known as the pan flute. And to keep the beat, they used percussion like the tympanum frame drum and the crotalum, which was a type of castanet used in religious dances.
But get this, one of the absolutely most mechanically complex Greek instruments ever conceived was the hydraulos. This was an early keyboard instrument and the direct, undeniable forerunner to the modern pipe organ. It actually used water to supply a constant, steady flow of air pressure to the pipes. Air gets pumped into a wind chest, compressing water in a dome. That rising water then creates a perfectly steady air pressure that flows right to the organ pipes. It was an absolute marvel of ancient fluid dynamics and acoustics.
Let's dive into Section 4, Myth, Society, and Anarchy, the Power of Music.
The ancient Greeks took their music so incredibly seriously, they viewed it, quite literally, as a gift from the gods. Greek myth actually credits the god Hermes with inventing the very first lyre by attaching strings to a tortoise shell. But, Greek myths, they get much darker. In one famous story, a satyr named Marsyas bragged about his skills and actually challenged the god Apollo to a musical contest. Marsyas played the Aulos, Apollo played the lyre. Apollo won, and his prize? He flayed Marsyas alive. Yeah, that brutal, terrifying little anecdote shows you exactly the immense weight and divine origin they assigned to musical perfection. And hey, the ancients had their grumpy music critics too, longing for the good old days. The philosopher Plato bitterly complained about a new revolution in Greek music. He absolutely hated that newer musicians were relying on showmanship and virtuosity, violating the established proper rules of musical modes just to hype up the crowd. He called it an unmusical anarchy that was leading to a pernicious theocracy. Honestly, it sounds exactly like a modern music critic complaining that today's pop music is just lawless noise compared to the classics.
And finally, Section 5, the echoes of ancient music, the enduring legacy.
4,000 years. To put that into perspective, the intervals, the tuning systems, and the acoustic sciences that were perfected in ancient Mesopotamia 4 millennia ago, they still dictate the fundamental structure of the music we enjoy right now, today. Why? Because the ancient human ear was structurally exactly the same as ours. The mathematical consonances, the octaves, fifths, and fourths that they found inherently pleasing back then remain inherently pleasing to our brains today.
Which brings us to our final, pretty profound thought to wrap up this explainer. If a 4,000-year-old melody unlocked from a dusty clay tablet in Nippur uses the exact same notes and the exact same scale as today's biggest pop hits, is music humanity's only true universal language? It is simply amazing to think that across millennia, through the rise and fall of countless empires, the way human beings mathematically organize sound to express joy, sorrow, and the divine has remained completely unbroken. Thank you so much for joining me to unlock these ancient sounds. Keep learning, keep listening, and I will see you next time.